Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to Sister Wives with Mary Jane Kay. Today, I'll be breaking down Sister Wives, Season 2, Episode 8, Sister Wives in Holiday Crisis. This episode is going to mention the fear and the threat of the investigation. So just as a reminder of the facts, I'd like to quickly go over part of the Utah Attorney General's statement regarding the Browns investigation. Facts and truth are so important, and obviously on a reality show, there will be a lot of gray and narrative spinning and plot points to manufacture drama, and of course, we find this in every aspect of life, whether it's social media, reality TV shows, even the news doesn't get things accurate. We see someone's social media, we take it as an accurate representation of one's life, when that is really just a curated snapshot and an image the profile holder wants to project. It's only a small facet of who the person is. And it's often highly edited and filtered and curated and manufactured, but it is only what seems to be and not an accurate representation of the person or their life. It's just an image of what the person wants to project. And it's the same thing on a reality show. We also see this in the news media these days, where as a viewer, you have to do your homework and research. You can't take what is said in the media to be the 100% truth. So I think truth is of the utmost importance. And let's keep the facts in mind and reality in mind and the truth in mind as we watch these episodes. The Utah Attorney General at the time of the Browns investigation said in his statement, similar to our own office policy, Utah County only prosecutes bigamy crimes against those who induce marriage under false pretenses or if there is a collateral malfeasance such as fraud, domestic abuse, child abuse, sex abuse, or other abuse. So again, unless Cody and the wives were committing additional crimes, they had nothing to flee from whatsoever. I just want to keep the facts in mind because the show will try to manipulate viewers' emotions, and many viewers could get sucked into the manufactured drama. I understand that the Browns did this, in my opinion, to stir emotions, to push for decriminalization, and I understand them wanting their lifestyle decriminalized. Even though I personally don't believe it's a healthy lifestyle, I have said many times it should be legal to the point where even all the wives get legal status. Because if they don't have to hide in the shadows or live in fear, then it's more likely they will report abuse or divorce, or that they will even have a legal leg to stand on, or access to resources or medical care or counseling. They may be more likely to use law enforcement when needed, and the having to hide the way that they live acts as a barrier or obstacle for the women, in my opinion. Even though I don't personally feel that it's a healthy lifestyle choice or something I would want for myself, as far as religious freedom and allowing people to live, consenting adults, the way that they want to live and the way they want to structure their family, everyone should be allowed. Polygamy was decriminalized in Utah. But Cody and the wives, other than Christine, refused to move back, interestingly. I think personally that using a false threat, many other polygamous families actually faced in the past, knowing that you are privileged enough not to face an actual threat or familial separation and bandying it around to manipulate viewers' emotions, makes a mockery of what other polygamists faced and struggled through in the past, and it also makes a mockery of the viewers. If the faith is so high ethics and high morals, couldn't all of what Cody's trying to achieve be done with honesty? Cody could have said, I am fortunate enough to know I'm not under threat of charges or a familial separation, but in the past, historically, this happened to many families. And I think it's time to decriminalize polygamy because consenting adults shouldn't be told by the government how to live. And it infringes on religious freedom. And the hiding and living in the shadows creates obstacles for many women and children with things like getting help in DV situations or medical care or access to resources like counseling, or even having the luxury of calling law enforcement if needed, not in fear that you will be charged with something because of the way you live. And that, of course, has to end, and no one should live in the shadows. And it was, in fact, decriminalized in Utah. That would have done the trick without mocking the families who were separated in the past and without attempting to make a fool of the viewers as well. But that's just my opinion. Also, I just want to remind everyone, please check out Cooking with Just Christine on TLC's website and Instagram page. I think it would be really great for Christine to succeed in her passion, and it's a small way to be supportive of her as a viewer, is for her to get those views. Okay, let's get into the episode, Season 2, Episode 8, Sister Wives in Holiday Crisis, Keeping Everything in Mind. The family is at the cabin in the mountains. I just love this cabin. I love snow, and I love this. Every time I see this cabin, it brings me back to snow days and awesome memories, and I just fucking love it. The scene opens with Janelle and Christine hacking up a lung. If I didn't know any better, it would look like they had the Rona, but these are the pre-Rona times, thankfully. Everyone is lazing around the cabin. It's packed to the rafters with people and piles of stuff. Cody explains that everyone is sick, but they're in a winter wonderland, and that's cool. Aurora is like 7 or 8 years old at this time, and she runs to Cody and she jumps up in his lap and she's cuddled in his lap. In my opinion, she's a little too old for that. Cody's biological kids aren't even cuddling with him. Robin's kids seem to need a lot more attention, in my opinion. The kids are playing in the snow, and Janelle says the kids are acting as if they have never seen snow before, but they live in snow. Cody says 4 months ago they went public, and through the paper they learned that the Lehigh City Police were doing an investigation on their family, and Christine says recently they just found out that the investigation is over, but they have turned it over to the county. Robin says they're basically making them nervous, very, very nervous. Janelle says there has been some discussion as far as to what the next step is for their family, and they have considered moving out of state. Christine says historically, when polygamists have been investigated, like for example, her grandfather, the wives and him were all sent off to jail, and then the family gets separated and the kids get separated. And that's just not something that they want to have happen. Historically, yes, in the 60s and 70s and earlier even, families were separated and it was a real threat. But even though bigamy was criminalized in the state of Utah at that time, the policy was that they don't charge you unless additional crimes are being committed. And the Browns knew historically, yes, it happened in the past, but it was not going to happen to them. You were not charged for living polygamy or bigamy charges unless other crimes were also going on at that time. And the AG made that clear along with others in the media, that unless other crimes were occurring, there would be no charges. So historically, it happened, yes. In the past, long ago, families were separated, but the Browns were privileged to know it would not happen to them. The separation or fines or jail unless they were committing other crimes. They had a privilege those other families of the past didn't have, of knowing they wouldn't be penalized, and yet they behaved as if they were under the same threat as the families of the past who actually were separated, making a mockery of what those families went through and also trying to fool viewers. Imagine if they said, "We are grateful that we know we won't be charged or penalized, but in the past, many families faced separation and legal consequences for living their faith, and we would love to see polygamy decriminalized so that the hiding in the shadows doesn't block access to resources and help for women and children who need it." Instead, they made a storyline and drama on the backs of past suffering they were not facing themselves. And also, they were trying to manipulate the viewers emotionally. And I just think if there are such high morals and ethics, they would have been honest about this, and they could still use their situation as an opportunity to bring up the history and the need for decriminalization. Anyways, Robin says if you look at the logistics of it and you look at the history of it, they just really shouldn't be here anymore. They need to be somewhere else other than Utah. They told some of the older kids, Logan, Hunter, Mariah, Aspen, and Madison, about the move, but no one else knows. The kids are opening up the hot tub to heat it, and Janelle warns them it will be like heart attack city to go from hot to cold. No, I've been in a hot tub in the snow in the mountains before many times, and once you get in, when it's heated after the few seconds of adjustment, there is something really peaceful about being in a hot tub and being surrounded by snow. It just feels amazing, and I particularly love it. So Maddie says when Janelle told her they were moving, she just told her she couldn't make her go, and she wasn't going. Mariah says she cried a lot. Maddie says she just had all of these plans, and they're all down the sink now. Logan says they were told that within a matter of weeks, they have to be out of the state. And that just kind of sucks everything out. And then you realize that you have this very limited time to tie up all of these loose ends. The older kids in the confessional scene look devastated and traumatized. I had to move every few years as a kid because of my dad's job, and it was just part of the deal. And I can't tell you how stressful and sad and emotional it is every time. You make friends, you fit in to leave, and you do the process over. And you don't get to grow up with the same friends or to keep all of your friends from childhood. And it's a lot of stress on a child. School and friends is their whole world, socially and otherwise. And when you have to leave that to an unknown and then be the new kid and adjust and meet new people who already have friends they grew up with, who already know where they fit in, it's not easy, and you adjust, but it can be very traumatizing and very stressful, and you don't get the same core group of friends and peers to grow up with and know for life necessarily. To put your kids through that is a lot. It can cause resentment, trauma, stress, anxiety, depression, and all kinds of things. It's not always easy. As an adult who went through mini moves up until junior year of high school, I have to say, I sincerely wish that I lived in one place, or even just one or two, and that I had the same group of friends I grew up with into adulthood. And I wish I had that. I can look back and all of those friends that I had are still friends with each other. They grew up together and they are close into adulthood. But I never got that same experience. I just want to point out that moves just are very stressful and agitating to kids. And also, one odd thing I noticed, and this is totally a side note and off topic, but Logan is going outside and he has jeans on that are low, they don't fit right, and then he has the band of his underwear sticking up. Maybe they're long johns, I don't know, and his shirt is tucked into that band, whether it's a long john band or boxers, I don't know. But it just looks really weird to tuck your shirt into your undergarments and then have your jeans, but you're not tucking your jeans into your shirt, you're tucking your shirt into whatever you're wearing underneath and then having your jeans. It was a very weird look. Why not just tuck his shirt into his jeans if it must be tucked in? I don't know why tuck it in at all. The kids are excited to get in the hot tub. They're so happy. And Hunter is all smiles. And we know from later episodes that he was highly depressed after the Vegas move. He was sad and unmotivated, and he would just detach and sit in his room, holed up. He went from being a star athlete to not wanting to do much because the move was really hard on him. And I could relate to when Hunter went through that. Cody says the hot tub changed the attitude for the teenagers. The hot tub got them excited, he says. Cody throws in a big block of snow as the kids are enjoying themselves. Christine is watching the kids enjoy themselves, and she says the hot tub is the coolest thing. Cody tells his kids they don't want the hot tub colder, that's for sure. And one of his older kids says, "Dad, don't yell at them." And Cody explains he wasn't yelling, he was just trying to make sure they can hear him over the bubbles. Cody always has to be the center of attention. He can't just let his kids be the center of attention. Cody goes to knock snow off of the cabin roof. Janelle is worried that it could fall and be a hazard. And Brianna runs up to him and she asks, "Daddy, what are you doing?" So by now it's 5 or 6 months into her mom marrying Cody, and she already calls Cody daddy. And we know that their courtship, according to Cody, lasted 6 months. According to Robin, lasted 10 months. So if it lasted 6 months, Brianna hasn't known Cody for even 11 months and she's already calling him daddy. So I think that's interesting that she knows to call Cody daddy. The kids are sledding. Cody says the hill to the cabin was a natural sledding haven. So there is this big drift and it wasn't slanted. It was straight up and down. So the kids were coming down there and face planting into the stop. Cody wants to make a better ramp. They want to make it steep enough to see how high they can get in the air without going over the top slamming into the side of the house. Cody tells one of his sons he will get way higher than him, but when Cody tries, he barely makes it to the base of the stop. He gets nowhere at all. He doesn't even make it up the incline at all. Cody says they need to do more work. Robin says the kids aren't the only ones who wanted to go sledding. Mary all of a sudden decides she wants to go sledding too. Robin, Cody, and Mary join in the fun. Cody goes down, once with Mary, Robin, and himself, once with just he and Robin, and they slow themselves before hitting the ramp, so it's not a disaster. Cody goes, and he almost made it to the top when he goes alone because he doesn't hold back. Mary starts doing her turn. She sleds down and she falls. Robin explains, Mary has got a crazy streak. She gets this little glint in your eye, and you're like, Robin says on the confessional couch. She ends a lot of sentences unfinished with, and you're like what? Mary interjects that sledding isn't that crazy. Robin says, well, she knows it's not crazy unless Mary decides to do it. Mary is sledding down and she hits the steep cliff of snow. She goes all the way over it and hits the side of the house. Cody's cheering and clapping loudly, yelling, yay, Mary, as she hits the side of the house. Mary yells, yeah, beat that. Her sled is to one side at the top of the steep mountain of snow Cody crafted, and she is sitting against the side of the house, thankfully all in one piece. She is stuck in the snow. She can't get out, but she's all smiles, thankfully, and unhurt. Every time I hear the little noise as she crashes, I cringe. Cody helps Mary up. She tells Mariah, look at your mom go. Cody says, whoa, that was totally cool, Mary. Mary says she was all safe. She wasn't hurt at all. She didn't bump any knees or elbows or anything. She says she got the furthest. Christine jokes, next time we'll just open the kitchen window and you can fly in. Robin says when they were up at the cabin, every single time they were doing anything, she would look at the older kids and she would think, she knows they are sitting here thinking, this is the last Christmas here in Utah. Robin knows they're sitting here thinking, what's next? They don't know. It's nice that Robin has empathy for the kids. What about the adult sister wives of hers? When she and Cody took the 11-day honeymoon right after the wedding and the wives were left on pause, full of anxiety, waiting to adjust to the new normal and the new family dynamic that they had to wait for 11 days to find out what it would be like, knowing all they have ever known would never be again. And the new normal was yet to be seen. And they had 11 days of waiting to find out. And what about when Robin took all of that time from Cody's kids and his wives in the rotation? But I'm glad Robin is concerned for the older kids. The older kids are sitting in confessional. Mariah is still not over it. She fidgets with her necklace, looking very morose and heavy and stressed. Aspen says she's mad. She says she's not mad. She's just sad about it. She doesn't want to leave all her friends here. And Logan agrees. Maddie is in tears. Logan says it's not just that. It's not just about leaving friends. It's kind of like the scare factor of why are we moving? He says if we don't, they could potentially split us up. And that says you have no choice but to move, basically. Maddie says all they know is what they are leaving behind. I really feel for the kids because the AG, the investigators, the policy in place made it clear and known that they would not be bringing charges or prosecute a family for living polygamy, only if other crimes were being committed. And the kids were left with the impression that if they don't move, they will be separated. Their parents will be jailed. And that wasn't the case. So it must have been very traumatic for them to uproot their whole world thinking they must, because the alternative is losing their whole family when that was never the case. I just think to some extent the kids were manipulated because the media made clear the Browns would not be prosecuted or charged with anything unless there were additional crimes. But the kids think it's move or mom and dad go to jail and we get separated. So they have the trauma and fear of not only losing their family, but also of leaving all they have ever known, their peers and their social life, their social hierarchy, which is everything for a kid or teenager. And they feel it's leave or lose their family, move or lose your family. And then they have the added trauma of moving, making friends, adapting and fitting in. This is too much to put on a child. It's way too much stress and trauma. I wonder if the kids were ever made aware, at the very least, their parents won't be jailed and they won't be separated as a family. Because imagine the weight of, as a kid or a teenager, I'm losing my family completely, or we have to move. And if we don't move, I will lose not only everything I've ever known in my friends and my school, but I'm going to lose my family too. The Browns moved for Cody and for a storyline that in itself is unnecessary trauma to uproot kids. But to on top of it, make them feel mom and dad will be jailed, you will lose your family if we don't move, when law enforcement and the AG made clear again, there is no threat unless there are other crimes being committed. Cody had the privilege of knowing the policy and that he wouldn't be penalized or separated, but he put his kids under all that stress and trauma, making them feel they had to move or lose their family when they were never going to lose their family unless Cody was committing additional crimes. It's one thing to milk stuff for drama for viewers, and another to make your kids believe that there is an actual possibility of jail and familial separation when there isn't, and then using that as the reason why the kids have to give up all they have ever known. That's a mindfuck, and it's stressful and traumatic and unnecessary for the kids. Either the kids are milking the drama, or they don't know there is no threat, and judging from their reactions on the show, I believe they believe the threat is very real and very serious. This is the type of stuff that creates resentment later on in life between kids and their parents. And it's manipulating and preying on the kids' real fears as minors to justify the move to them. This is all just my opinion, of course, but I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it's healthy or moral or ethical either. The kids are all hanging at the cabin. McKelty is decorating the tree. Christine pulls a huge turkey out of the oven. The wives are all cooking together. Christine says she liked working in the kitchen together, and she just has to say that. It's interesting because in an episode with the Dargers, when they discuss sharing a kitchen, I believe they're dining at a restaurant with the Darger family, the Dargers were mentioning how sharing a kitchen was good for them. And it was mentioned by Cody, I believe, that the wives can't share a kitchen. And Christine was the most adamant voice in opposition to ever living in one house. Mary says the kitchen could have been just a little bit bigger. At the cabin, Cody acknowledges it's an awful small kitchen for 4 wives. Mary and Christine agree it needed a lot more counter space. Christine is telling Robin what they have, and Robin says in confessional she felt like it was Christine and Mary's kitchen, and she was like, Mary apologizes to her here, and Robin says no, it's not a bad thing, but she probably should assert herself more. Poor Robin, so shy and meek, quiet as a church mouse, timid in fact. She has so much trouble communicating and asserting what she wants. She's too shy. She's too selfless. She needs work. She needs help finding her voice. Christine says she thinks that's all it is, that Robin should assert herself more. Christine says because Robin is probably used to that when she comes over to the big house, it's their kitchen. Christine says it might just be something where Robin doesn't want to infringe on anybody. Robin says, yeah. Christine says Robin doesn't want to make anybody uncomfortable. And Robin says she never does. Mary says they all knew it was Christine's kitchen and it's okay. Christine says she didn't have a problem. She puts her head in her hands here, her hands over her face, like she's ashamed or embarrassed. And she says she wasn't meaning to be dominating. She even gets slightly a little bit blushy. Robin says she knows. Mary says she totally didn't think Christine was being dominating. Christine explains she just loves cooking for everybody. Her face gets flushed and Cody looks down. So I wonder if the past sharing kitchen issues had to do with Christine. We don't know. Mary tells Christine she thought it was all good. Cody puts red noses on his little kids like Rudolph and he giggles with them. To be honest, it was really cute. Cody says he loved this experience. He says there was one time when he was watching all of the wives in the kitchen work together, knocking hips, and he was really pleased to see the experience. They were bantering back and forth. They were having a lot of fun. Robin says Cody got really cute about it too. he just kind of got all doughy-eyed like, "Oh, all my wives are in the kitchen together cooking." It was very interesting to hear Robin's perspective, Janelle says, because her own domestic skills are significantly lower than some of her other skills. She has, so she really doesn't know what to do. And so a lot of times when it comes to the cooking or the cleaning, when they're all together, she will just disengage. Christine tells Janelle she doesn't consider her to be less domestic. Janelle says it's more that she doesn't engage, and then over the years, she would hear comments at first about being lazy or whatever. She asks, "You know what I mean?" Janelle says, "And so those are the old tapes that are playing." This is during confessional, and Cody looks morose and heavy. He's looking down at his lap. Mary is looking at Janelle in a very serious, tense way. Janelle is basically saying, in my opinion, that during her first few years of marriage, that Mary would degrade her, call her lazy, and say other negative shit about her because she wasn't too engaged or involved with the cooking and the cleaning. And maybe Janelle wasn't being lazy or trying to put her share of work on the other wives. Maybe she just didn't know what to do. That's not her wheelhouse. And it probably turned Janelle off completely to be criticized like that when it's something she might be self-conscious over. So she probably has an issue engaging with cooking and cleaning with the wives in a group setting because of Mary's early criticism of her, when she probably already felt less than on par in those areas. Cody is staring at his lap. He's straight up just looking down at his lap during the confessional scene, completely disengaging. And Mary is looking serious, and it is so noticeable. But this is just my take on this. And we know Mary and Janelle had a lot of tension over Mary's overbearing and demanding and critical nature with Janelle when Janelle first came into the family. So I believe this is specifically regarding Mary because Mary looks at Janelle filled with tension as Janelle is just barely touching on this. And Cody is totally disengaged automatically. He's literally looking at his lap. Christine asks Janelle, what would make it better? Janelle says she doesn't know. She says nothing. Just don't expect her to be much help in the kitchen when they're all together like that. After dinner, it was time for their very special Brown family Christmas Eve tradition, Janelle says. All the kids hold up their wrapped pajamas from Mary and they take a group photo holding up their presents. Then they unwrap them all together. Mary explains since Mariah was 2, she has been making pajamas for the kids for Christmas Eve, and she gives them to them every Christmas Eve. The kids know to expect it now. Logan is grateful. He says he can't wait to sleep in these pajamas tonight. There are even these adorable baby-sized PJs for Truly. Janelle says it's so funny because when they started with the pajamas, she doesn't know how the fashion show also evolved, but it's awesome, and they do the fashion show in the pajamas too every year. So basically, everyone tries on their PJs and struts their stuff on the Brown family catwalk. They take a group photo of all the kids in their PJs. I like this tradition. I think it's cute. Cody says they are having Christmas together as one big family, and now it's Christmas morning, and the kids are about to wake up. There's a huge pile of presents like one would see at a toy drive, maybe even more than a toy drive. Janelle says it's 3 presents times 21 people. Mary explains every year the kids will draw names of one of the other kids and they will choose a special gift for this one child. And for her, that's the funnest part, watching them, because the one who gives the gift is almost more excited than the one who is getting the gift. And so it's fun to watch. Robin gets Mary a Yadro type of porcelain figurine of 2 sisters dancing. Mary loved the gift from Robin about sisters. To Mary, it was a sweet little thing between she and Robin, and she thought it was really sweet. So back then, they were sisters, and Robin got her the figurine of 2 sisters dancing together, representing she and Mary. And Mary wanted to bring Robin into the family to have an ally in the house and a best friend, in my opinion. In my opinion, this gift of a figurine of 2 sisters dancing is a manipulation because Robin knows Mary approved of her in part to have an ally in the house and that Mary really wants a sister wife as an ally. But in the book, Robin made clear some women are more interested in having sister wives, but her main priority was her husband and romantic relationship going into the family. In my opinion, it was never about sister wives for Robin. But she knows Mary wants and expects that bond with her. So even though to Robin it's not so important on top of her priorities list, she got that sister's figurine for Mary, which is kind of emotionally manipulative to me because Robin knows that Mary wants to be like her best friend and her sister. Remember how irked Robin got when Mary wanted to further her education and spend less time on My Sister Wives closet? Robin wasn't too supportive of Mary fulfilling herself and her dreams. She was more concerned about getting less help from Mary. The sisterhood isn't reciprocated, in my opinion. When Mary wanted to do the inn, Robin wasn't too supportive. Robin didn't volunteer to put time into the inn the way that Mary put time into My Sister Wives closet. Mary sacrificed her legal wife status to Robin, and she legally divorced Cody so Cody could adopt Robin's kids. When COVID hit and Mary was the only other wife down to follow Cody's unreasonable self-made COVID mandates, knowing she lived alone and wasn't a risk, and that Mary is a highly social creature who felt lonely and isolated, Mary still wasn't welcomed over by Robin, even though Cody gave Robin the green light. Robin allowed Mary to feel lonely and alone, and she made the excuse that Mary wasn't welcomed over, even though Cody was fine with it. And Cody had been fine with it for months and months and months and months and months and months. And the same for Mary. Mary had been following the COVID mandates for months and months and months and months and months and months. The excuse from Robin was that Mary wasn't allowed over because she didn't want the other wives to be upset or feel Mary was welcome in her house when they weren't. As we know, Christine and Janelle followed CDC guidelines. They refused to follow Cody's ridiculous C-19 mandates. And they hung out together separately with their kids, separate from the group, Janelle and her kids, Christine and her kids. And they assumed Mary and Robin were hanging out too all of that time for like a 10-month period. They never thought that Mary was isolated the whole time, and they were shocked when they found out. Christine and Janelle both assumed that Mary and Robin had been hanging out the whole time, just like they had been hanging out. They didn't know Mary was alone. Christine and Janelle also weren't dying, chomping at the bit to hang out at Robin's house. They were already hanging out together, so they would not have cared at all one bit if Mary went over there and they didn't. They both already assumed that Mary was hanging out at Robin's house the whole time. They were shocked. They were absolutely astonished. And Robin made this bitch-ass excuse that even though Cody sanctioned it, she didn't have Mary over because she didn't want the other wives, Christine and Janelle, to feel upset that they weren't welcomed when they would never have wanted to go over there in the first place. That's some of Robin's sisterhood. Robin says that's what's cool about having sister wives is you develop this sister-like relationship and it's very special to her. And Mary says me too, and she is seated next to Robin on the confessional couch as Robin says this. Mary cries as she holds her sisterhood figurine. She is so moved by it. And she says it's cool. And Cody says that's really cool. Let's go over what Robin wrote in Becoming Sister Wives. Some of my sister wives were more interested in the sisterhood than in the husband. But perhaps since I'd been married before, I knew that I needed a man whom I loved, trusted, cherished, and adored. Robin's main priority is a romantic love, her marriage and her husband. She isn't too interested in sister wives, only when it's convenient to her, in my opinion. Christine explains there will be times when they are closer with one sister wife than another sister wife. It all ebbs and flows. As Christine says this on the confessional couch, Janelle looks very distant. Cody asks Christine, have you ever had a time when you were closer to a sister wife than to me? Cody says he's just curious. Christine says no, she has always been closer to Cody. Cody asks anybody of his wives? Mary says it's like comparing apples to oranges, and Christine says that's true. As we know, Christine is probably closer to Janelle now than to Cody. And in the past few seasons, it really felt as though Christine was closer to Janelle than Cody, and Janelle was closer to Christine than she was to Cody. And as Cody's behavior progressively devolves, we see Christine and Janelle being a support system for each other through it. And I think that that's wonderful. Cody says he's just wondering about that. In my opinion, Cody knew that the wives were going to say that they're closer to him, and then that will boost up his ego, and he knew what answer he was going to get when he asked that question. The kids are excitedly opening presents. Mykelti is super stoked she got a cell phone. Christine explains because they might be moving, she got Mykelti a cell phone. Christine wanted Mykelti to have contact with her Utah friends. At this, Cody puts his arm around Christine and he gets real close to her and he asks, "Are you still confused on whether we are going to move or not?" Christine pauses and she says yes, and she looks distant. Robin says Christine has a choice just like all of them. And Robin is looking at Cody as she says this, probably trying to prevent Cody from the meltdown of a dictator here at this point on the confessional couch. Christine sighs and she says she doesn't want to move. She doesn't want to move their kids. She doesn't want to move their family. She likes where they are at. Cody just says, Mary looks down. She's heavy with emotions, but she's not saying anything. She's just looking down. Cody tells Christine he knows she wants something miraculous and something he doesn't even know what could happen. But he tells Christine he doesn't think he can change his mind just because Christine says. Christine says she knows, but she doesn't think Cody is even listening to her point of view. To that, Cody says he is listening. Christine says, but Cody says that they are going to move regardless of what she says. So she asks, how is that listening to her point of view? Cody says nothing, and Robin prompts Cody. In front of everyone on the confessional couch, you've got to tell her why you think we should move, Cody. I just want to point out that Robin is interjecting during the scene to rein Cody in because I think she can tell his mask may slip and he will start on his authoritative trip, and for optics, she gives Cody suggestions right in front of the wives on the confessional couch and in front of viewers because they have to always make sure the optics are right. She may think it comes across as empathy and compassion, but in my opinion, she is just managing Cody and the optics because she knows where Cody is headed and what the optics will look like. She is quick to point out that Christine has a choice, all the wives do, when Cody puts his arm around Christine and asks her if she is still confused on if they are moving or not, in a very belittling and condescending way, in my opinion. Robin also tells Cody he needs to explain to Christine why they need to move, when Christine says her point of view isn't being heard, because Robin knows Cody has to make it seem like it's move or have no family, or else him pushing his decision on everyone. If there's no threat and they don't have to move because of the threat of the family separation, this would just be Cody pushing the move on everyone just because he wants to move for no other reason than himself. Cody pushing his decision on everyone will appear to be authoritative unless it comes across that the family is backed into a corner. It's move or be separated and jailed. And if that's why Christine's point of view matters less than what Cody decides as the leader, than what's best for the team, it will look better. And Robin wants to paint the right narrative and prevent Cody from looking like the manipulative, authoritative, selfish asshole that he is, in my opinion. Remember when Cody said his family is an obstacle to his goals in life? This family they have to keep together in the face of this big bad wolf of a threat. And when Cody says his wives are obstacles to his goals, and during the honeymoon special when Cody lets slip, we, meaning he and Robin, decided to give them, his other wives, some of what they want. See how Cody and Robin work as a team against the larger family, and Robin helps Cody keep things stringing along with each wife? She helps Cody on what to do and say with each wife, what crumbs to give where. But that's just my observation. I could be wrong. We're just getting highly edited, produced clips of a show to create a narrative. So we're not really getting the full picture, obviously, but just based on what I see, that's my opinion. Christine says she just doesn't want to make decisions in fear. Cody says he's sorry. He knows Christine feels like they are making a decision in fear, but he has made a decision for himself in faith. Christine says she is going to go with him. Cody says he has made the decision for himself in faith. Again, Christine tells him he has made the decision for the whole family. Cody asks, should I not be the person that does that? Christine responds, you are the leader. I understand that, but you know we chose you to be the leader. She says she is just having a really hard time with feeling like there is no possibility of her having a choice. Cody says, based upon the need for this family to function in peace, they need to move. Cody tells Christine it's not out of fear, it's out of taking control of their own lives. She says she just doesn't want to, and Cody tells her sorry, dismissively. After Christmas breakfast, they loaded up on the snowmobiles. Mary says they were hoping this cabin vacation would be something that would distract the older kids from thinking about the move so much, but they could tell it was still in the back of their minds. In confessional, Maddie is in tears. She says if we stay, there is a potential that our dad could go to jail and our family would be split up. Aspen says we all want to stay together as a family. Cody says nobody wants to have to do this and it's a major challenge for all of their children. He says he understands all of that, but in spite of, then he stops and says he feels like on some level, in spite of any potential collateral damage, like the emotions of the children, moving schools, the financial struggle, that it will be because of this change. In spite of all of that, he feels like he knows what needs to happen. Nell says very quietly after this, I don't. Christine tells Cody she thought he wanted to move. She always felt like Cody is so excited to move and he wants to move and start over again and he doesn't want to do this anymore. Cody says that's for the sake of leadership. He tells Christine if he doesn't go optimistically, Christine asks, you don't want to move? Cody asks Christine if he is going, kicking and screaming, and what do you think my wives and kids are going to do? Christine says she thought he wanted to move. She didn't know that Cody was just being optimistic. Back on the confessional couch, Mariah says she doesn't know what to think. Logan doesn't think it's fair, and Mariah agrees. Hunter says anybody else would probably do the same thing. It's either stay and they get separated or go away just because it's better to keep their family together and move than it is to stay and get separated. Cody says that's the biggest thing. The kids leaving a home that they love living in, leaving a school that they love, leaving all the relationships that they have. Cody says it's all very challenging and very sad. Maddie says she is sad to leave her best friend. She's sad to leave her behind because they were going to be legends in this town. Hunter says he's actually very, very mad that they are leaving. He starts crying and he says he won't. And then he starts crying again. And then Maddie says they're all going to start to cry because Hunter never cries. Hunter is crying and he says he thinks he made lots of friends. He has tons of relatives. He has his football team. It's going to be tough as the tears are streaming down his face. There is a lot to discuss here. Christine mentions not feeling heard, that her opinion doesn't matter or have any effect on Cody's decision. In a past episode, Janelle had mentioned that they aren't like the polygamous stereotypes where the women don't have voices. But here it appears Christine is making it clear she doesn't have a voice. And when Christine voices, well, how is it taking my point of view into consideration regarding the move when Cody says he is just moving? And she says, obviously she will go. If he goes, she has no choice. Cody mentions also that he should be the one to make the decisions, to be the leader. And Christine acknowledges Cody is the leader. Didn't Cody say during the special with Natalie Morales that he can't ever tell his wives what to do, that doesn't work, they don't allow it? Janelle, in previous episodes, said it was like a democracy where they all vote. Cody said it wasn't about ego or leadership or control, that his wives do what they want. And here he says he is the leader. And Christine acknowledges it, and she acknowledges her point of view has no bearing on the decisions Cody makes. Cody says he's not the leader. During season 1, he says he can never tell his wives what to do. They won't have it. And in the Halloween episode, season 2, episode 4, Robin mentions that Cody doesn't control them. And Mary says he likes to think he does, but he doesn't. And here he acknowledges he is the leader and he should be the one making the decisions. And Christine makes clear her point of view isn't taken into consideration, and she concedes that Cody is the leader, and if he moves, she will go. Christine also mentions that Cody seems excited about moving, like he wants to move and start over. And Cody says he feigns that for leadership purposes. It's a false optimism. But he feels they have to move for the family to stay together and to function in peace. And Christine says she was under the impression that Cody was enthusiastic to move. And Cody says he has to do that to lead by example for his kids and his wives. He can't go kicking and screaming as the leader. Cody seems to manipulate the wives into feeling that they have to move to ensure peace and staying together. And what's worse is he put this false threat and burden on the kids. Cody says he feels like on some level, in spite of any potential collateral damage, like the emotions of the children, moving schools, the financial struggle, that it will be because of this change, in spite of all of that, he feels like he knows that's what needs to happen to keep the family together, to have peace. Janelle says she doesn't after he says this, and Christine was under the impression Cody was enthusiastic about moving and starting over. In my opinion, I think Cody moved because Cody wants to move. And we know there is no legal threat of separation. Again, the AG said, and I'm going to read it again, even if it's annoying. Similar to our own office policy, Utah County only prosecutes bigamy charges against those who induce marriage under false pretenses, or if there is a collateral malfeasance, such as fraud, domestic abuse, child abuse, sex abuse, or other abuse. So I think in a sense, Christine is outing Cody, who may actually want this move and push for it and be enthusiastic about the move. Christine says he was enthusiastic and excited. He wanted to start fresh. He can't do this anymore by staying in Utah. So in my opinion, Cody's motivation is himself and his want to move. This has nothing to do with the threat. In my opinion, I think Christine knows that Cody wants to move for Cody, and that the move isn't really catalyzed by the investigation. It's just catalyzed by what Cody wants. When Cody said he feels the move needs to happen despite the collateral damage, Janelle says quickly, I don't. So I think the wives know they are moving for Cody's self-interest, and on the show and to his kids, Cody painted this move as necessary to live in peace, to stay together, to avoid the threat, the big bad wolf. And behind the scenes, Cody was wanting to move, wanting to start over. He was very enthusiastic, wanting this for himself, not for the threat, but on camera and to his kids. The move is predicated on this threat of separation, not because he wants to move. It's manipulative emotionally for everyone, his wives, his kids, the viewers. When Christine mentions she thought Cody wanted this move, this starting over, Cody says no, he pretends to want it. Because if he complains, how will his wives and kids act? So he frames it as leading by example and feigning this optimism. Because on camera, Cody wants to, in my opinion, maintain the storyline of moving out of necessity to avoid familial separation. If Cody was optimistic and wants this move, and he makes it known that he is uprooting his family for what he wants and forcing them to go when they're not all on board because he's the leader, when there is no threat of separation, that he will look like a fraud and a pompous, manipulative, dictatorial asshole who traumatizes his kids and his wives, in my opinion. There's a lot of emotional manipulation involved with Christine, with his wives. And when Christine called out Cody's enthusiasm, he had to save the narrative and say, that's just to be optimistic as the leader, as if he's moving because he has to, because he has no choice, because he's backed into a corner, when really he's enthusiastic and he's excited about moving and he wants to move, in my opinion. Christine had no say and she wanted to stay and she went. And then when polygamy was decriminalized in Utah and she wanted to move back to Utah, Cody told her he was enthusiastic to her face. And then in front of the wives, he flipped and threw Christine under the bus as the wives refused to consider what Christine wanted. Cody knows if he decides they move for his own selfish reasons under the face of no threat, and he makes the final call without his wives being heard, and he uproots his kids and his wives for no reason other than him wanting to move, and there is no threat, he will look like a manipulative, pompous asshole. And I'm not sure if this is true or not, but this is pure speculation, but I know one of my viewers who I believe is credible let me know that Robin's father, may he rest in peace, did live in Vegas at the time that they moved there. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but Robin's dad did live in that area. Allegedly, possibly, I don't know that to be true for a fact. I want to now talk about Cody manipulating the kids. I believe all the kids believed, based on their reactions on the show, that they could move and give up all they have ever known or face family separation if they stayed in Utah. And I 100% believe that those kids 100% believed that if they stayed in Utah, their family could possibly be separated and their parents could be jailed. And they believed that was a viable, probable possibility. So if they have to choose between keeping their lives in Utah or losing their family, they obviously will move and be on board. Moving is very stressful and traumatic for kids. To kids and teens, their school, their friends, their activities, that is their whole life, their whole world. And when you move, you leave your relationships, your existing social order and hierarchy to adapt to something new. And you may not fit in the same place in the new system. And it can be sad and stressful and cause a lot of anxiety and emotional swings. These kids believed that they had to endure this or lose their family, their dad, their mom. They could be separated when it wasn't true. But Cody sold that to them. Imagine being a child or teenager and knowing you have to do this sad, traumatic thing, this move, because an even bigger trauma is weighing on their shoulders, an even bigger burden of losing their family, separation. To put that on a child, especially when it's not true and it's not going to happen, there would be no charges unless there were other crimes. So to put that on a child is unthinkable in my book. These kids were traumatized by moving and told, we have to move or we won't have our family anymore. So imagine not only the stress and turmoil and trauma of saying goodbye to your whole world and social order and then moving and adjusting to a new one, but also feeling if you don't move, you will lose your family. Imagine all that stress and anxiety on a child's mind, the heavy burden on their shoulders. Imagine telling your child, we have to move, we have to sacrifice everything we've ever known, or you won't have your family. When that isn't true, when there was no threat of separation, unless Cody, the fearless leader, was committing other crimes. Rather than just say, as their father, I want to move, I think it's best. The threat isn't viable, the investigation is a formality, we won't be separated, but I think we should start over because I think he didn't do that because he felt his kids would resent him. And he was willing to put them under the weight and stress and duress of believing if they stay, they will be separated and they have to go. And that's such an added weight and stress and trauma and burden on his kids. Cody would rather put that false threat on their shoulders than be truthful and have his kids resent him some. Also, the kids, when they move, could also get picked on or have trouble fitting in, and that could cause even more trauma and issues. And Cody felt that all that was worth it to put his kids through. He couldn't even level with them because then they would resent him. It feels to me like Cody didn't tell the truth because, first of all, for the storyline, Second of all, he wants to look better in his kids' eyes and manipulate them into automatically being on board with the move. And he capitalized on his kids' emotions. They cried on camera believing this is real. And that's so effed up, in my opinion, beyond. If Cody wants to move because he wants to move, he should be honest with his kids. And maybe they'd resent him. But instead, Cody allowed his kids to live with the fear and burden of thinking they will lose their family if they don't go. And they have to lose all of their friends and school. They don't even get to say goodbye, in fact. All they have ever known, the kids are saying goodbye to, thinking that they have to keep their family intact. And they would have kept their family intact regardless of if they moved from Utah or not. And then they had the stress of adapting when Cody could have leveled with them and taken some resentment, but lifted at least that fear and that stress and that burden from their hearts. But Cody can't bear to be resented. He prefers admiration. So he was willing to put the weight of that false threat on his kids and emotionally manipulate them for the cameras and a storyline. And so they would get on board with a move without hating him. He would prefer his kids adore him and have a heavier burden and fear than for them to feel secure and resent him, at least knowing their family will be remaining intact no matter what. That just shows Cody's character, in my opinion, to a T. Cody would rather his kids stress, not only in regards to the move, saying goodbye to everything they know, and adapting to a new world. And Cody would rather that his kids ride a traumatic emotional roller coaster of all that under the pretense and heavy weight of the threat of losing their family, then at least saying, I want to move because I want a fresh start, but the investigation is a formality. There won't be charges. Don't worry. But we are moving and you may resent me, but there is no threat. Mom will go away or I will go away and you guys will be separated. The family isn't getting separated at all. There's no legal threat, but we wanted to move, so we're going to move. Instead of doing that, he's willing to put that burden on his kids. Rather than alleviate that fear, Cody would prefer to let them feel the threat is real to keep his kids' resentment at bay towards him, like they must do this for the family, staying together. And he would rather that they live in fear and are on board with this move than being honest with them, that there is no threat to the family. They don't have to worry about that. But because he wants to move and he doesn't want to have them resent him, he's doing it this way. And I think it's cruel and disingenuous to his kids and to his wives and to viewers, but this is all just my opinion. That does it for this episode of Sister Wives with Mary Jane K. I'll see you Thursday or Friday for the next episode of Becoming Sister Wives Book Club on Chapter 5 entitled Mary. And next week for the next episode of my Sister Wives Rewatch, Season 2, Episode 9, No Place for Home. To my YouTube viewers, please like and subscribe and let me know your thoughts on Sister Wives down below in the comments section. I love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you soon. Bye.